Welcome to MAREA, the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association, for our 2024 Season of Sustainability and Renewable Energy presentations. MAREA is a 501c3 nonprofit grassroots organization made up of volunteers dedicated to educating and engaging the public and advocating for renewable energy production, energy efficiency, and sustainable living. We encourage you to listen, ask questions, experiment with what you learn, and help others become more sustainable. I'm Phil Jones, tonight's host. This is our second meeting for this year. We'll be back the next Tuesday in March to continue our monthly presentations on renewable energy and sustainable living. We post presentations and registration links on our website at www.themarea.org. That's THEMAREA.org, where you can also add yourself to our mailing list to receive our email reminders. Next month, on Tuesday, March 26th, we will be featuring a presentation about an important but not frequently discussed component of our renewable energy future, fuel cells, by Jetson Giuopari, Director of Strategy and Business Development at Fuel Cell Energy. Tonight, we're presenting Protecting Our Environment with Native Trees. During the presentation, please mute your microphones. You can enter questions into the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will ask your chat questions to the presenter. Tonight's presentation will be recorded. And now I'm pleased to introduce Tami Jo Shimp. Tami joined the Berks Nature team in 1997 and currently serves as the Vice President for Development and Community Relations, with the primary responsibility of raising awareness and support for the organization. Tami is a lifelong resident of South Heidelberg Township, Berks County, and has a sincere passion for protecting our local natural resources. She graduated from Penn State University with a BS degree in environmental resource management. She enjoys sharing her experience in both conservation efforts and fundraising with others in our community. Welcome, Tami.
Thank you, Phil. And hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me tonight. Going to share my screen. Okay. Berks Nature is also a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We focus on, well, I like to say our work is in two buckets: protecting nature and helping to connect people to nature. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we lead into best management practices and native trees. I recognize not everyone here is from Berks County, but please know that all the work that we do is applicable to other communities, and there are organizations like us in just about every county. So at the end, if you even want me to connect you or refer you to similar organizations, I can probably do that. We also have a lot of great pictures, so you'll see a lot of pretty pictures of the region. One of the ways we help connect people to nature, since everyone likes to enjoy nature in different ways, of course, is managing some public nature preserves and trails. So currently we manage 6 nature preserves that are open to the public. And I just love to tell everyone about these. You can get directions to them and learn a lot more about them on our website. But there's Never Sink Mountain, of course, nestled right on the south side of Reading. The Onalani Wetland Preserve is near Shoemakersville along the Schuylkill River. We have a great bird watching property called Bob's Woods at the Earl Pool Sanctuary in Alsace Township, near Antietam Lake. Of course, Angelica Creek Park, which is also home to our headquarters, in the city of Reading, near Alvernia. The Mallex Wildlife Sanctuary is relatively new, and that is in southern Berks County region near Birdsboro. And then, of course, the Gravity Trail is a popular trail that connects some resources in the city. Again, great places to visit. I hope you do, and you can find directions on our website. We manage 9 community gardens in the city of Reading. Yet another way that we help get people to spend more time outside. And of course, now it's a lot of access to local, healthy, fresh food. So what we do is transform vacant lots into more attractive green spaces. And then we make individual plots, roughly like 4 foot by 10 foot. You can see that in the upper right-hand picture. And we rent each of those plots to neighbors in the community for $8 a year. So it's an affordable way for people to have their own piece of land to grow flowers, herbs, fruits and veggies. And some people choose to donate what they grow. Some families do, work on the plots together. It's really your own piece of land to grow your own things. And it's been a great experience. Naively, when we started this program many years ago, 2005 actually, it was more of a beautification project initially, but it quickly turned into a community spirit kind of project, a place where people would gather and again do positive activities. I'll talk later on a lot about volunteer opportunities. These garden programs provide a lot of opportunities for volunteering if you like getting your hands dirty. We partner with the Reading Housing Authority on about half of these properties, so that their residents have access, and then the others are rented to neighbors, as I mentioned earlier. We manage 4 wonderful watershed associations throughout the county. Hay Creek, which is in southern Berks, Tulpahawken, which is western, Angelica, which is right around our headquarters there, near south side of Reading, and the Maiden Creek Watershed Association, which is much of like the middle and northern part of Berks County. These are groups that live in these regions. They are volunteers that have a lot of expertise and do water quality testing. They do public education projects, tabling events, just teaching people about what we do, and really are the grassroots, engaged, active volunteers on the ground. So right now there's 4. I hope a few years from now there's even more watershed associations, but it's a really important part of how people can make a difference literally in their own community or backyard. And also, I will drive you to our website, berksnature.org, to learn more about each of these watershed associations. You can attend a meeting just to see if you're interested and learn what they're up to. Each of the associations meets monthly at different locations and works on a lot of projects throughout the year. So whatever your interest might be, I'm sure you might find one of these areas interesting for you. And other ways, again, we're in this connecting people to nature bucket, right? So another thing that we do is we run a summer camp for 10 weeks throughout every summer at the Nature Place. And I will share that we're not ready to go public with it just yet. Hopefully in about a week, we're likely opening a second location in Hamburg. So if any of you are in that northern Berks Hamburg region, we'll have a summer camp there this year. Fingers crossed. We're just about there. But it's a great way. I mean, these kids are outside all day and getting dirty and learning about nature. We own and operate actually a full-time nature preschool at our headquarters at the Nature Place. And again, we're really passionate about children spending time outdoors and making that important connection at a young age. This nature preschool is different from your traditional preschools you might be thinking of, in that the kiddos are outside 75% of the day, every day, year round. So yes, on those cold, frigid days when we're walking down the trail to go to work, so are these 3 and 4-year-olds carrying their backpacks coming to school for the day. And they love it. They're outside learning all the time. We learn a great deal from them. But they bring their own reusable water bottles every day. They learn leave no trace. I mean, they know, for 3-year-olds, they know a lot about the environment. And it's just a gratifying program. I'm pretty passionate about this. I'm passionate about everything that we do, but the fact that, if you're familiar with Last Child in the Woods, which is a great book by Richard Louv, the author, he's a huge advocate for children spending time outside. And, he says in the United States, on average, 1% of our youth that's how much time they're spending outside in unstructured play. So that was a really disturbing statistic that we heard, and it was really one of the main things that helped us drive our efforts to get this preschool up and running. 1% of their time outside. That's unstructured play, which is key. That doesn't mean soccer games and football games and all those things, which are great too, but you have an adult telling you what to do. We're talking about the things that I remember as a child, and playing in the woods and jumping over the creek and getting hurt and getting back up again and negotiating with your friends without an adult there. So good things are happening, and I thought it was important for you to know that this is a big part of what we do every day. I've mentioned the Nature Place a few times, and if you're not familiar, it is a nature center. We're open to the public Tuesdays through Saturdays. It's free. You can come visit us from 10 to 3, Tuesdays through Saturdays. And when you get there, we have some public exhibits and displays excuse me, that teach you about local nature and watersheds especially. We're pretty passionate about water. And you can learn about your own watershed, things you can do to protect your watershed. And there's plenty of trails and outdoor green spaces to see as well. We are a LEED certified green building by the United States Green Building Council. So there are some really cool green sustainable features in the building, on the building, and outside around the building for you to look at. Things like that wood siding we're looking at right now is reclaimed boards from mushroom houses. During construction, our builder, Berkey, found a stockyard in Chester County full of these boards from old mushroom operations. So we were able to use them. Of course, that's less junk going to the landfill. And we like them because they're made out of cypress or hemlock, which is really resistant to the environmental damage, rot, things like that. So it's low maintenance, looks beautiful, and then most importantly, it's reclaimed, as is the stone you see on the first floor of the building. So there's a lot of great green features to come and see. We have rain gardens, which you learned about last month. That was a great program. We have rain gardens. We have a native pollinator meadow, a nature play area for children, and we run a lot of programs. We have a public program almost every day. So I encourage you to go online. There's a yellow tab up top that says events, and you can go, there's free events and paid events, and you can explore those pages and see everything we have to offer. We do a lot for families and have intentionally started a lot for adults as well. Adult programming is quite popular. I get so excited, I need my water. Now we're going to switch gears here, why we're all really here tonight, and talk a little bit more about things that we all can do to protect nature. One of the things that our organization, as well as, like I said, any other land trust in any other county, works on is land protection. And what does that really mean? That's the biggest way we make a difference in making sure the land is always protected, primarily from development. And we achieve this through something called a conservation easement. So let's pretend, I'm going to pick on you, Phil. Let's pretend Phil, our moderator tonight, owned 100 acres of woods. And Phil wants to make sure that those woods are always woods, even beyond his lifetime. He could work with an organization like Berks Nature to protect that with a conservation easement, which is basically like a 30-page document that says what can and cannot be done on the property forever. It's a perpetual agreement. He signs it, we sign it, and there's a lot more that goes into that. I'm simplifying here in the essence of time. And it's recorded in the Recorder of Deeds office, so it follows the property. So we signed this agreement with Phil. We're protecting Phil's woods. He decides he's moving to California. I should have let you choose where you want to move, Phil, but let's pretend you're moving to California.
Okay.
Our organization is dedicated to making sure that your woods will still always be your woods. We signed that agreement, and we will work with the subsequent landowner to make sure that they're following the same guidelines. And that's what makes conservation easements so powerful. You always have that third party kind of watching over it. And by law, we're required to visit that property once a year to make sure everything's going the way that the original landowner intended it to. And to date, we've protected about 11,000 acres in our community through the use of conservation easements. And we own another couple thousand of the nature preserves. That's land that we actually own outright. But with a conservation easement, the landowner still owns the land. They still farm it, lease it, do whatever you do on your land. It's just restricted from main subdivisions and development kind of projects. Having said all of that, our organization is not anti-development necessarily. I mean, we believe in growth. We believe in a healthy economy as well. But we subscribe to the County Planning Commission's comprehensive plan. And they've identified areas as like conservation or ag preservation, and then other areas as future growth. So the areas identified as future growth are areas where there's existing infrastructure, water, sewer, maybe adjacent to existing development, where if we are going to grow, that's where it would make sense, not out in the middle of a 500-acre parcel in rural northern Berks County. So we focus our efforts on those areas identified as conservation and ag preservation, not on the future growth areas. A question I get quite often is, how do you decide where you're going to work and spend our limited resources on these efforts? This map is one of our many tools that we use, but I think it says a lot. And what this is a map of Berks County, and the red areas are the top 20% of the highest conservation value land in the community. This is based on science, not Tami or Berks Nature. It's a map prepared by the Planning Commission, actually, originally, and what those red areas end up being are all the pristine forests we have in our community. Again, that's the top 20% of the highest conservation value area. And I think we all know an undisturbed forest is about as pristine as you can get in the conservation world. So the top left part of your screen, that large, long red blob. It's my scientific term there for the night. That is the Kittatinny Ridge. That's where you'll find Hawk Mountain, Appalachian Trail, lots and lots of state game lands, Hawk Mountains Boy Scout camp, a lot of great properties, all woodland up in those hills. A lot of good water comes out of that mountain range. Just real quickly, the other smaller red area on the right side of Berks County there next to Ole, that's called the Ole Hills. And it's a 28,000 acre area of forested land that sits just east of the Ole Valley. Many people know the Ole Valley and the great farmland we have there, and tons of preservation of farming. Right next to that is this gorgeous backdrop of pristine forest. And out of that little red area comes six exceptional value streams, which is the highest level of protection you can receive in Pennsylvania by the DEP. So we have 6 exceptional value streams just coming out of those 3 to 4 municipalities right there. And again, it's all forested. And then at the southern end of our screen there is the Hopewell Big Woods, French Creek State Park, another really large, beautiful, undisturbed forested land. That doesn't mean we don't work all over the county. But if we have a limited grant to use or some kind of resource, this does help prioritize different areas and what it means to our forest and water quality. But trust me, we do work all over the county, not just in the red areas. Another tool that I hope we all walk away learning tonight, and no matter where you live, is what watershed you live in. I mentioned our watershed associations earlier, and now this will help you kind of figure out where those regions are. It's the Hay Creek area, Tulpehocken, Maiden, and the Angelica. But all the watersheds in our community are important and deserving of people caring about them. I've learned that most people, including my husband and sons, don't know what watershed they live in. Well, they do now, but years ago they didn't know. It's just not something we think about. And we've learned that if people learn what watershed they're part of, at home, at work, during your travels, at school, at church, wherever, you tend to care a little bit more and might get involved. So I encourage everyone, if you don't already know, to figure out what watershed you live in. Obviously, this is just the Berks region. But there's EPA has great resources online to explore watersheds, as do many other organizations. So you should be able to find that information on the internet relatively easily. And another challenge I help kind of get people to think about is not only what watershed do you live in, but where does your drinking water come from? That's something we all take for granted. And typically have good clean water coming out of the faucet, but where's it coming from? Are you paying a bill? And if you are paying a bill, where is that water supplier getting their water from? The answer isn't always as obvious as you might think. Sometimes you have to be a detective to find out where that water source is. And once you have that figured out, what are they doing to protect it? What kind of what kind of plans are in place to protect that water supply? What would they do if there was a spill along, Route 183? I'm making this up, to protect the water, things like that. About 40% of us get our water from a well. And for that population, it's important to get your well water tested once a year. But the rest of us pay a bill. And again, figuring out where that water comes from is important. It's a big part of your life. And I personally want to know what they're doing to protect it. And the good news is we have great water suppliers in our community, and they're all doing a really good job of making sure they're supplying the best water to our homes and places of business and schools. But you still want to know what resource it's coming from. So, for example, in Reading, in the actually greater Reading area, kind of like the lower center part of this whole map, we all get our water from Lake Onalani. And Lake Onalani is in the Maiden Creek watershed in that blue area there on the map. The Reading Area Water Authority draws their water. It's about 25 million gallons a day out of that lake. Cleans it, processes it, sends it into our homes through miles and miles of pipes. The Western Berks Water Authority over by Blue Marsh Lake area, they draw their water out of the Topahawken Creek, just below the Blue Marsh Dam. But they're different. They're a wholesaler. So they'll sell their water to other municipalities. And you know what? It's not always obvious where that water is coming from. So, for example, they sell their water to Wyomissing. They sell their water to parts of Shillington. So if you live in these different communities, you may not understand where your water is coming from because you're paying the borough a bill. You're paying them a water bill. But here your water's being piped from the western part of the county, from that resource. So they're all doing really good things. They plant a lot of trees, install a lot of best management practices to protect those water supplies for you. But I still challenge you all to figure out what that looks like for your own home and neighborhood. About 65% of our streams in Berks are considered impaired by the DEP. 65%. So our work, and a lot of the work we're going to talk about tonight with best management practices, works on improving those impaired streams to try to reverse that damage, and also protecting those pristine places that we already talked about, primarily the wooded areas and great forests we have. If we keep them protected, it keeps the streams healthy. Land and water are they're married. What we do on our land directly affects our water, our streams, and our lakes. We also do a lot of land management, and this is where we're going to get into these best management practices. So anything we do on the land to help improve the environment, particularly water, falls into this category. And over the years, we've developed a reputation with people like the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and the Game Commission, Pennsylvania Game Commission. They'll come to us with properties that they come across that have an endangered species on it or require some kind of unique management because of who lives there. And we've been fortunate to get a few grants out of these relationships to manage these sites. So, for example, what we're looking at here happens to be a property where the bog turtle lives. We've probably all heard of the bog turtle. They live in wetland habitats. They're endangered. And the few populations we have in our community are very healthy. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came to us for this particular site and said, here's a grant to work with the landowner on best management practices to manage this site for the wetlands, so water quality, and the bog turtle population. So what we did here is the landowner had the Longhorn, Texas Longhorn cattle. And the bog turtle, I've learned this, I'm not a bog turtle expert. The bog turtle likes to live in and reproduce in wetland areas that are disturbed by cattle because of in the wet areas, their hoof prints and the divots they leave. There's something about that environment that the turtles like for their mating season and egg laying and the whole reproduction. So certain times a year, the cattle are kicked out of this pasture that we're looking at because that's the sensitive time for the bog turtle to do their thing and repopulate. And then other times a year, the landowner allows the cattle back in to continue grazing and work the wetland area for the benefit of the turtle eventually. So it's one example of a best management practice that I think is a little unique. It's not something we think about, but just working with that landowner to decide what times a year his cattle have access to this really special area is a great practice that has really helped this particular population. So again, what is the best management practice? We all can do best management practices. It's a practice or a combination of them. We'll talk about a lot of them. That's determined to be effective in reducing pollution. Really, I'm simplifying it, but most of the time we think about best management practices in relationship to water and water quality. But it's for wildlife habitat, it's for the environment in general. When you think about large landowners, there's some BMPs that are a little different for them. And that's where we can have a really great impact. And when I think of large landowners, of course, any of you could be sitting here with large properties, but I'm thinking of municipalities and their like public park system, golf courses, of course, farms, larger farms and institutions, campuses, hospital campuses, universities, and then corporations. Some corporations own really large parcels of land. What's the common thing we see most often with all of these large landowners? They mow, 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 mow. We like to mow for a lot of good reasons, I'm sure. But the difference that people can make with designating natural areas obviously is a great benefit for the environment and wildlife and water, but also could turn out to be a money-saving activity for the landowner. And that's the way we've gotten some people to pay attention to this and really focused on these large landowners. So there's some municipalities that are looking at new management plans to reduce their amount of mowing and allow for open natural areas that maybe only require mowing once a year versus once a week. The cost savings and the environmental benefit are just huge. So that's a really, really big BMP, is just, managing the mowing and the landscaping a little bit better. About 42% of our region around Berks is forested. So of course we want to see that number grow. But when we talk about these large landowners, we're not just talking about creating forests. That's not realistic for everyone, but just stopping the mowing and allowing the grasses and meadow environment to come back is huge. Told you I had a lot of pretty pictures. This is the Blue Marsh region in western Berks County. And you can see the beautiful network of agricultural land mixed into the community here. Agriculture is our number one land use. It's our number one industry. It's huge. It's important. Because it is such a large activity in land use in our region, of course, we work with a lot of landowners that are on farms. And that's where we can make a great impact. When we approach these properties, it's not just looking at one particular problem. It's we call it the whole farm approach, and really just want to help the landowner have an efficient, profitable business that is less impactful on the environment. So there's a lot of best management practices that we can do on these properties that really help the water quality and the environment, and also help the landowner, which is equally important. So here's a good example. You see the top picture is, you see the yucky, muddy, somewhat of a stream runoff area. So when I say whole farm approach, we're not just going to go in and say, okay, Mr. Smith, let's fix that runoff and plant some trees there and fix that property. No, we're looking at the whole thing. What are you doing with your manure? Where are you storing your manure? How many times a year are you applying the nutrients to the fields? If it's a dairy operation, what are you doing with your milk waste? Where's that being stored? You know, all those good things. We work with other groups too. It's not just our organization. And come up with a plan, a plan for improvement on the property. So the bottom picture represents, you know, on the right, there's a dry manure storage building there, a dry stack building, where we can store so many months of manure before it's applied. The middle there's a liquid manure storage facility that can store all the waste and the milk house waste to be applied on the farm about twice a year. So all those things all add up to best management practices that improve the land. And it could be big or small. I named some pretty big, expensive things here, but it could be as simple as replacing a gutter on a barn to reduce that runoff getting into the barnyard, or planting trees, or not mowing a certain area, that kind of thing. So they could be all over the place for these large properties. For these examples I just provided on the farms, the landowner always does have some skin in the game as far as the grants we use. We sometimes can leverage over $1 million of grants coming into our community each year for this kind of work. But the landowner does pay a portion of that. Stream bank fencing is another good example of a best management practice. This is probably where you can get the most bang for your buck as far as making an immediate difference on the stream and runoff, where the fencing keeps the animals out of the stream for much of the time, but they usually still have a crossing area or an access area to cool off and get a drink and do what they do. But they just don't have I'm going to back up here. They don't have access to the whole thing where they're trampling down the stream and kicking up sediment and contributing to the runoff getting into the stream. This way they're more restricted. So the stream is protected, but the animals still get to cross the pasture and get drinks and cool. Streams, one of the biggest impairments in Pennsylvania is sediment. You know, streams are impaired from erosion, which is sediment washing, you know, off of the land and into the water. It's a natural process, but we speed it up by dumping a lot of our excess stormwater into our streams. So when it rains, the water level is rising a lot higher and a lot faster than it would naturally. And that leads to some severe erosion problems. Earlier, I said 65% of our streams are impaired. This is probably one of the main reasons why. So what do we do about that? What can you do about that? On large land, any land, it doesn't matter what size property is. If you have a stream running through your property, you really want to see that stream bank protected. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Here's some examples. On the left is the Tulpahawken Creek. Those are called biologs. They're made out of shredded coconut fiber, so it's bendy and flexible. And you put those logs along the edge of the creek. You can actually plant things into that log or behind it. And over time, it helps protect that bare area and allows the stream bank to rebuild itself naturally. Riprap, which is the rock on the right side of your screen, is another very effective measure. It doesn't look quite as nice as far as blending into the landscape, but it's a really good tool for serving as armor on that stream bank. So now when we get a big rain event, which happens more often, that water level is going to rise high and fast, but that rock is protecting that sediment from washing away. So here is that stream erosion example. You want to focus on across the stream, that bare soil and the severe kind of like drop off, the erosion drop off there. This is an area near Nolde Forest where we implemented a project many years ago. It's a good example of what you want to see next to a stream and what you don't want to see. So what we don't want to see is this bare soil. You want vegetation not only to cool the waters, but protect it from runoff. So we went in there, we got a permit like everyone else has to. We regraded the stream banks, we put down some riprap. So you see that armor. You see a biolog in the center there around the bend. We laid down that matting, that blanket to hold the soil in place until all this new stuff grows. We planted a bunch of native trees and shrubs and threw down a couple 100 pounds of native seeds, grass seeds, to reestablish the area quickly. You want that to be green and hold the soil in place. And this was about a year and a half later. We're looking at the same spot. And now down around that bend on the other side of the stream, you see all that vegetation there. When it rains, it's going to slow down that runoff. It's going to use it. Less of it will be getting into the creek, and it holds the soil in place. This is the kind of environment you want to see next to your streams. That could be as simple. I mean, this was a lot of work here because there was some restoration involved. It could be as simple as just not mowing that area. Still thinking about large landowners here. This is a school campus. And we'd like to work with more schools to implement some big projects that double as environmental protection and education. So the principal came to us here and said, what can we do? You know, this is mowed all the time. It's not used. What can we do? This was in the Wilson School District in Berks. So we worked together to get a grant and turned this retention basin, into a native pollinator meadow. And then what this picture does not show is that the teachers and the principal also planted a bunch of trees and made like a walking trail around the campus. So bonus for them, they're not mowing this particular area anymore, and they stopped mowing some other parcels as well. It's better for the pollinators and wildlife. They're saving a little bit of money from not mowing, and we were able to establish and get people excited about some educational areas. Most importantly, planting more trees. We also did a similar project as this with the Fleetwood School District and the Andrew Mayer Elementary School. There's some really dedicated teachers there that have done some great work. Here's an example, and we're gonna get into trees. This is an area that was not mowed, but just was more like a meadow habitat, and we wanted to work with a landowner to turn it into forest. So what we're looking at are relatively newly planted trees scattered throughout the property. There's some oaks and some river birch there mostly. And this is just a nice progression. If you watch the houses in the background, you can see over time as this grows. So we're spanning about a year and a half between pictures here. So now you can see how they're growing up a little more. Nothing is mowed anymore, but we want to get that tree cover to shade the stream now. And obviously it's helping reduce runoff, but we really want that tree growth. So that's after a little over 3 years. You can see how they've grown in, and now the stream is much more shaded. Moving away from like the really large properties, what can the rest of us do to help the environment and water and practice our own best management practices? Well, you learned a lot about rain gardens last month through that great presentation. I've already provided my mowing lecture, so we can all be a little bit more thoughtful about what needs to be mowed and what could be maintained a little bit more naturally, or even mowed less. There's things you can do just with your gutters and like water management on your own property. Where's your runoff going? Is there a way that you can capture it and keep more of it on site, whether that is through a rain garden or a rain barrel? so you can reuse the water for your own purposes in your garden. And just think about the runoff that's occurring maybe on your own property, no matter how big or small it is. And of course, planting native. Can't talk about planting trees and plants without talking about the importance of native species. Native plants are those plants that occur naturally in our region, but over time, humans have utilized ornamental or non-native species because they're attracted to them for whatever reason, to plant a lot of our landscapes. It might look pretty, but non-native plants and ornamentals are not as beneficial to our wildlife, particularly our insect population, which triggers a lot in our ecosystem. So, for example, no matter what size yard you have, planting trees or shrubs native is a great way that you can immediately help wildlife. Oak trees are my favorite, and oak trees are considered the real powerhouses in the environment. If you are able to plant oaks, native oaks support 534 species of moths and butterflies, which is unbelievable. So they support more native insects than any other tree species in the United States. If you're not already familiar with Doug Tallamy, I recommend you Google him. I believe he might have been a guest here at some point in time. Wrote numerous books, most recently Bringing Nature Home or Nature's Best Hope. Oh my goodness, I get them confused. They're all good books. But he's really this native plant expert, and the way that he can describe the relationship between the insects and the birds and the whole ecosystem and the difference you can make in your own backyard is fascinating. So I do steal a lot of statistics from Doug. That makes him happy, though. Spreading the word. One of my favorite quotes of Doug Tallamy and messages that I wanted to share was what he said here. So this is 85% of the land east of the Mississippi. 85% of the land is privately owned. So, the thinking here is we can no longer depend on, the state park systems or the national park systems or some kind of public entity to save this space. 85% of it is owned by us. So the changes to be made really lie in our hands. And what Doug's message here is this, in this like dominantly human landscape, we have to start thinking differently and landscape these areas with plant function in mind, meaning native plants, and create habitat where humans are, not just where humans are not. So quite often somebody will say to us, well, I just live in a townhouse community. What can I do? There's nothing I can do to help pollinators or birds or the environment. Well, that's not the case. I think we really do need to think different about this. And just planting pots on your back patio, if that's all you can do, that will make a difference. And Doug's point of this quote here and imagery is really to get people living in communities like we see on this slide to think different and be part of the solution. Even if it's in a highly developed area, we can make a difference. I got smart and started putting this slide in all my programs because everyone always asks, what tree should I plant? What tree should I plant? What tree should I plant? I'm not a huge like native tree junkie or expert. What I speak of is from experience and from all the great people I'm surrounded by all the time. But these are some of the most popular trees that Berks Nature plants every year. And we get most of these from Octoraro Nursery, octoraro.com. It's Octoraro. They're wonderful. Their website will tell you what the tree is suitable for. Um, we plant trees every April and October. And I've said to Joe and Chuck and Phil and others when we were planning this talk that we have a recipe for tree success. And that recipe is, I'm going to use a Larry Lloyd quote now. Larry is our senior ecologist and a fascinating, knowledgeable person. We don't plant trees, we grow trees. So our recipe for tree success really lies in what you do after that tree is planted. Planning it properly is a big deal, and I'll point you to some resources about how we do that. But it's the stewardship that follows that planting that really is the key here. So again, what's our recipe for success? This is our Trails and Preserve manager, Jeremy, but he happens to be standing in a fenced area, fenced to protect it from deer, that's all, where we store our trees. So the very last weekend in March or one of the first few days of April, Octoraro will deliver a huge truck of native trees to the nature place. We store them in this staging area. We have to water them all the time. We take care of them. But we can store them there, and then we take that time throughout the spring, just like primarily the month of April, to plant them in our designated locations. So proper planning is important. Those trees were already ordered. We ordered them in January, thinking ahead to April, because if you don't order them that early, the nursery will run out. So the right time of year is really important. April and October are the best months to plant trees. It's the only months that we will plant trees. That ensures the best survival. And then you don't fight the site. What they commonly say, don't fight the site. So you really need to know what species you're selecting for what location. And a big part of our recipe is buying larger plants. So you see what we have in the staging area here are larger trees. And yes, they're more expensive, but we've learned over time that that's a better investment than buying the small seedlings or the little, like, I don't know what they call them, rocket plants. Those are great too. We haven't had as much success with those. So we plan our sites based on these larger trees. It's what we choose to do. And we purchase shelters and stakes with them, which we'll get into in a little bit. But you can see the whole pile of shelters on the left of the screen there. We won't plant one of these larger trees without that shelter there to protect it as well. So really, again, good planning, good quality plants. And again, there's other native nurseries around the region. Octoraro has really served us well as a wholesale nursery. So those are important pieces. And then willing partners. I mean, you need willing partners. Our volunteers are the best, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. And willing partners could be the landowner. You need someone that's going to let you on there to plant these trees. Or it could be a maintenance crew if we're in a public space, or a corporate space or municipal space. You need the people in charge of the maintenance there to be on board with your plan. That's important. We've seen rows of new trees and shrubs be weed whacked down because people didn't know or no one told them. So good communication with your partners is really important. And volunteers. We couldn't do any of this work without our Berks Nature ambassadors and other volunteers that help us with trees. Again, not just planting them, but the stewardship of them. I know members of your group have helped us plant trees in the past, and we're thankful for that. So thank you. April is soon upon us, so if there's anyone looking for volunteer opportunities, we have plenty, I promise. So I mentioned earlier, don't fight the site. Let's look at this image here. This is a school campus. And you can see it's hard for me without a pointer. You can see wet areas down the middle of the, like between where we have those pots lined up. It's a wet runoff area. No
You should
one's
be able
going
to
to
use your mouse. Try using your mouse.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Can you see it? This whole area here is wet. It's not actually a stream, but we're not going to change how wet that becomes each year. So let's work with it. We worked with the school. We worked with the maintenance crew. We came up with a plan to stop mowing that area. We're planting those trees. Each tree will have a shelter. These are the white shelters that'll be wrapped around each one and staked. And this area will now be protected by a buffer of trees. And then in the middle where it's wet, it won't be mowed anymore. I mentioned our tree planting opportunities. Becky is our volunteer coordinator. She will place you, she'll get you or your group hooked up with one of our opportunities. We have a lot of volunteer programs, not just tree planting. But since we're talking about trees tonight, I thought I'd plug our April and October tree planting activities. We're doing a lot of partnership with the City of Reading Public Parks right now. And really lucky to be able to work in some of their great park systems to plant really large trees. Some of these trees require machines to be moved, but it's a great partnership. So this still falls under our recipe for success with willing partners. Here is an example. This is one of the parks in Reading in the 18th Ward, and you can see how large those trees are. When you're in public spaces like this is a baseball field. So especially around a space that's used a lot by families and small kids and public, if you don't put in these really large trees, they're going to get snapped off and damaged immediately. Hard lesson learned through several projects. So here it's worth investing a lot in these large trees. And we have the city as a partner. So they use their machines to help us move these heavy root balls to the site. And then watering them is another key part of the recipe. And we had the Reading Area Water Authority as a willing partner to bring their, what's that called? Water buffalo on site to not just water that day, but they committed to watering those trees for that entire growing season on a routine basis. They were out there all the time. That is critical. So again, when I talk about recipe for success, it's so much more to do with what happens after planting. These larger trees are really expensive, and we don't want to be irresponsible with the donations and grants that we receive as a nonprofit. So we want to use that investment responsibly and make sure that these trees survive. So each tree gets planted properly, it gets watered, it gets the shelter, and it gets the stakes. And let's see what this, okay, here it shows. What that does is ensure that the deer, moles, bulls, rabbits, all the critters that can come in and damage the girdle, the trunk, the bottom of the tree there, the shelter protects them from all of that, and it's a worthwhile investment. We also started placing some of our interested Berks Nature ambassadors, which are our trained volunteers, to kind of adopt an area of trees. where they commit to visiting newly planted trees throughout the whole season, or even beyond that for a few years. And they visit the tree at least once a month and look for damage, remove any vines or invasive species that maybe started growing up and around the tree, make sure the shelter is in place and in that soil, so it does deter the moles and mice and smaller critters from getting under there and causing damage. And when needed to be watered during certain weather conditions, they'll water them. And that tree steward program is just wonderful. I think we had 19 people helping us this past October, visiting these tree sites and being good stewards of our newly planted trees. These photos really also show people planting the trees, and there's a proper technique to that. We have a YouTube video. I didn't want it's about 12 to 15 minutes long, so I don't want to show that tonight, but it's, if you're familiar with YouTube, it's Berks Nature planting trees. And we made it during COVID. It was a pretty informal thing, but it shows you how we dig the hole, tamp the soil around the tree, measure it, make sure that the crown of the tree isn't, people tend to plant trees too deep or make those silly mulch volcanoes over the trunk of the tree. So we show you how to not do that and leave the tree properly planted and exposed and watered. So there are techniques to use while planting the tree, and then the care afterwards is important. We were working with some students here on the lower picture, so you can see it's a great tool for students too, because they're measuring there, so they're using their skills to measure and make sure the depth of the hole is proper for the tree, and then finishing the project by planning and taking care of it. I think the most important part of that is making sure that the crown of the tree is level with the land. And that's key when it comes to planting the tree. This is one of our nature preserves that was a mowed area, it was mowed by a neighbor. We stopped the mowing, planted hundreds, you can see by all the shelters, literally hundreds of native trees, and have stewards visiting these trees more often than once a month, because there were so many there. So there's people watching out for them and visiting them often. Again, these shelters may not look attractive, but are really important when it comes to protecting them and for long-term survival. And I can tell you, in the past 3 years, we've had nearly 100% survival rate of all of our tree plantings. Normally, we wouldn't even know that information, because you have to rely on the landowners and other people giving you that. But now that we have people visiting all these sites, we know they're surviving and doing well. Other things, I'll call them tree tending obligations after the trees are planted. And I'm just about ready to wrap up here. Long-term tree tending obligations include communicating with the landowner and your partners, those maintenance crews, or the landowner. There's always new people involved. Make sure they're educated, communicate, don't mow it, tell them what you need. Our people go out and check and repair the stakes in the tree shelters and the tubes. Some of the trees need to be pruned in the spring. Our tree tenders will go out and do that. Monitoring areas for damage from deer or moles. After a significant weather event, we often need people to go out and make sure the shelters are in place and that there wasn't any crazy damage done after a big rain event. And then finally, again, removing invasives that might strangle or stunt tree growth is a routine maintenance activity. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so I will wrap that up there. And again, I really encourage you to look at the YouTube video for planting the tree. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of how deep to plant your tree and how to compact the soil around it and stuff, we get into that level of detail in that video.
Tammy, could you please put the link for that YouTube video in the chat? Because I've been I'm not a very good navigator, but I've searched 2 or 3 different ways on your site, and it doesn't come up. It says it just doesn't give me anything.
Okay. Yes, I will.
So I think it would be useful for the community gathered here to have access to that video.
Sure thing.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions here. The first one is, hello, Janice Kelsey from Chester County. We love Berks County programs and events. Would like to know what organization in Chester County would be similar to Berks Nature, as we would like to find someone to partner with and address floodwaters across Font Road in East Nant Mill. Thinking swales and tree planting would be appropriate, but need some help.
Okay.
So maybe you want to touch
Are you okay?
touch base
Oh, I
with.
just said, yeah. Oh, yeah, fine.
So
Chester, Chester County has a French and Pickering Trust, French and Pickering Creek Trust. They do a lot of land protection work. I'm not sure how much into the land planning they are, but they're certainly a resource, as is Natural Lands in that southeastern PA region. That might be a little out of Brandywine's territory, but Brandywine Conservancy is a good resource for land use planning too.
okay.
Should I stop
Sarah,
sharing?
pardon me?
Should I stop
Yes, you can
sharing?
stop sharing.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
sure. So Sarah said Janice could contact Vic at Green Valley's Chester County Water Resources, the Chester County Conservation District. So maybe that's a place also that Janice could get some guidance. In fact, Sarah put down I'm a neighbor and I guess a nearby neighbor, and she left her phone number. So Janice can get in touch directly. Have you found a way for golf courses to adopt native plants in strategic locations? They aren't likely to get affected by golfers' balls while being ecologically, functionally, and aesthetically pleasing, and they don't need mowing.
Yes, we do not have any recent projects that I can share that we did with a public golf course. But there are certainly other organizations that have had success with that. And it's on our wish list. But we just really haven't implemented, haven't had the ability to implement any bigger scale projects like that. But it's certainly in the conservation world, it certainly is talked about in a good partnership, because you're right. It could be transformed and does not need to be mowed along those outer areas.
Okay. Bill, do you want to get the next one or? Hello? Phil? You're muted.
Here we go. Bartlett Tree Company has determined that most spaded trees are 6 to 9 inches below grade, which means that is how deep the first true root is. Therefore, the overburden should be removed before planting. Is that consistent with? Want me to read that again?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it says Bartlett Tree Company has determined that most spaded trees are 6 to 9 inches below grade, which means that which means that is how deep the first true root is. Therefore, the overburden should be removed before planting. I plant 2 inches higher than the existing grade because the trees tend to settle.
Yeah, I know planting a little bit higher is a common practice, and that's fine. We tend to, plant it even, which has proven to be successful too. We do not remove anything to get to that true root system. I have not heard of that before. If the potted tree tends to be severely root bound, we will take a pocket knife and loosen up the root bound system a little bit and cut it. But we don't remove anything before planting.
Okay, the next question is from David Graybill, and he's in Dauphin County, and he would like to have an analogous organization to yours in Dauphin County. Are you aware of any?
I will have to get back to him on that. That's the one county I'm not super familiar with the other organizations.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
No worries. Another resource.
Monada Conservancy. Sorry, my brain's catching up to me.
Oh, yeah.
That's one.
Yeah. Yeah, we've worked with them in the past. Another resource is the local county extension service. This is from Christine Applegate. Another resource is the local county extension service. A master watershed steward or master gardener may be able to make suggestions. They also have native plant sales.
Yes, good suggestions.
Okay, great.
So does anybody, Monada, okay, I know them, thanks. David was getting back to you. There's nothing else in the chat. Does anybody want to ask a question verbally by unmuting? Now would be a great time to do that. And then Stephen Hines says the Penn State Extension Masters Watershed Stewards actively work with community groups to control stormwater runoff throughout Pennsylvania. So another great organization that's looking out for our land ownership and stewardship.
You can refer back to the video of last month's presentation to.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a question for Tami? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Oh, probably a lot of useful information, Tami, and thank you so much for taking the effort. Now we're going to get all these. Thanks for a great presentation, chats. But we really appreciate your efforts and sharing the wisdom and the passion you have for conservation and stewarding land ownership. Since we have 85% of the land, we should take care of it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tami. We appreciate it and all your knowledge, and best wishes for Berks Nature. It sounds like you guys are doing such great work out there, and we hope our audience participants will come and visit some of your sites.